Okay, hello, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Tikka for giving me this opportunity again for the second time. Last time I had spoken on informed consent, and today I'm going to talk on medical negligence. So, friends, one thing you'll agree with me that if there is a 1 teaspoon, a pinch of salt more in your food, or if there is 1 teaspoon of sugar less in your coffee, there is a spill in the tray, or if there is a stumble of a waiter in a hotel, these are all avoidable but unpleasant experiences which can ruin totally ruin a effort or an evening. I hope you will all agree. Similarly, a medical negligence by a doctor in a hospital or in a medical institution, it can cause the death of the patient. It can it can ruin the hospital's reputation. It can cause disasters to a family, and it can also cause guilt to a doctor. Plus, there will be an ongoing legal battle along with possible conviction. I don't know how many of you have noticed, but there is a not moving. I don't know how many of you noticed the spelling error in the negligence, and if those who have noticed, they must have already passed a judgment regarding my error. So just imagine, friends, if this error would have been on my prescription paper or during my surgery. So now what exactly is a medical negligence? Now this definition, it's either an act which has been committed which no other competent doctor would commit. For example, if you're doing suppose there is, you are seeing a patient who has a growth in larynx, you're not taking his biopsy, you're not doing the histopathological examination, and you're directly doing a total laryngectomy of that patient. That means you're committing an error. Similarly, if you're giving a false death certificate without knowing the exact cause of the death of the patient, or it can be an omission to do something which any other reasonably guided doctor would do. For example, you are not doing a xylocaine sensitivity test or a penicillin sensitivity test before giving that particular injection. So this is the definition of medical negligence. Now, what does a patient expect when he approaches a doctor? Nowadays, the patient, they usually see the Google reviews of the doctor and then they come to you. Now, what do these patients expect from you? First thing is they expect that you possess the necessary skill and the knowledge which you have put it on your degrees or whatever. Second thing, that you are using that skill and knowledge for himself. And third, whatever knowledge and skill you are using or applying, it would not harm the patient. So these three things the patient expects from you. And when these expectations are not met, then he goes to the court. So now where all the patient can complain? He can complain either in the civil court, in the criminal court, consumer court, either in the MCI or the NMC, or the district health authorities and the Human Rights Commission. Now these wrongs, whatever wrong which we have committed, it can either be a civil wrong, which is also called as a private wrong, and the criminal wrong, which is called as the public wrong. I will tell you the differences between the two. Now the civil, it is called as the private wrong because it is initiated by the patient. The patient, he files a case in the either civil court or in the consumer court. So it is called as the private wrong. And in whereas a criminal wrong, it is called as the public wrong because it is initiated by the state or the government. I will tell you later how this is initiated. In civil wrong, the patient, he wants any remedy for whatever wrong we have done, while in criminal law he wants to punish the doctor. In civil cases, even a very small degree of want of care, like for example, if the patient has slipped on a wet floor in your hospital, then also he can initiate a civil case. While in criminal case, a very high degree of carelessness is required, then only a criminal case is initiated. In civil wrong, the judgment is given, it's decided on the balance of whatever probabilities are, even minor probabilities, it can be decided. But in criminal cases, they have to be proved, the patient has to prove beyond the reasonable doubts. Then the liability of the doctor, it depends on what amount of injury it has caused to the patient. While in criminal cases, it depends on the amount and the degree of the negligence of the doctor. In civil cases, the vicarious liability is applied, while in criminal cases, no vicarious liability is applied. The doctor is himself responsible for the criminal case. And in civil cases, the punishment is usually only the financial compensation given to the patient, while in criminal cases, there can either be an imprisonment or a fine. Now, this is a landmark judgment which was delivered in 1968. This is the Lakshman Balkrishna Joshi versus Trimbak Bapu Godpole. In this, I'll just briefly tell you about this case that there was this small boy who fell and he had fractured his femur. He was taken to a hospital where the doctor advised his attendant to give, that time morphine was being given. He had advised his attendant to give 2 injections of morphine, but the attendant, he gave only 1 injection. He thought that 2 injections might be more because the patient was, he felt that the patient was already under anesthesia in 1 injection. He did not give the 2nd injection. And during the reduction of the fracture, the patient died. So in this case, the court has said that when a patient consults a doctor, he owes him certain duties to the patient. First thing is that the duty to decide whether he wants to undertake that case. Second is decide what treatment he has to give to the patient. And third, he has to administer that treatment. Whatever he has decided, he has to administer that treatment. Because in this case, the 2nd dose of morphine was not administered. Now, what are the components of negligence? Again, this was explained in that same case that there are 3 duties of, these are the patient can say that the duties were not met by the doctor. First is the existence of legal duty. That is a duty of care. That means there is a contract between the doctor and the patient that the doctor has agreed to undertake the case. Like a duty has been established between the doctor and the patient. Now, second is when the breach of the legal duty. If the doctor has he has not committed his commitment, like he has, as I told you, the definition of medical negligence, either it is an act of omission or commission. So either he has done either of the two, then there is a breach in that legal duty. Third is that there are damages caused by the breach. That means whatever the breach the doctor has done, there should be damages to the patient. The damages, they can be in the form of mental, emotional, financial, physical, and these damages, they should be foreseeable. When all these 3 components are met, then only a doctor is termed as negligent. Now, when a case is applied to a doctor, it's usually section 304A. That is the death due to rash and negligent act. In this, there is only conduct. The doctor has only conducted that negligence, that either the doctor had no intention and he had no knowledge that whatever he is doing, it will cause any damage to the patient. And the fine is that there is a maximum 2 years imprisonment plus fine, and it's bailable, and the bail can be obtained in the police station. Whereas in section 302, it's a homicide. There is a conduct plus knowledge plus intention. And in section 304, it's conduct with intention or knowledge. But always remember one thing, that a doctor as a human being is not immune to any section of Indian Penal Code and any law for the time being in force. Now again, these are 3 very landmark judgments for medical negligence. I'll just explain in short these 3. This is Dr. Suresh Gupta versus Government of NCT Delhi. In this case, Dr. Suresh Gupta, he had taken a case of septal correction. While doing the septal correction, the patient expired. When the postmortem report came, the death was because the blood had seeped into the endotracheal tube, from the endotracheal tube, because the endotracheal tube was not of a proper size, and due to which the patient had aspirated the blood and he had died. Now, in this case, criminal case was applied to the doctor, but the court said that it is the doctor is not criminally responsible, that whatever the negligence the doctor had done, it was not so gross that a criminal case has to be put on that doctor, and a civil case was put. So in this, the Supreme Court has given the following judgment: the doctor cannot be held criminally responsible for patient's death unless his negligence or incompetence showed such a disregard for life and safety of his patient as to amount to a crime against the state. Similarly, when the patient, he agrees to go for medical or surgical operation, every careless act of the medical man cannot be termed as criminal. There are many certain things when we take the patient. There are many times a patient might die or because of unknown causes. So every time a criminal case cannot be put on the doctor. So it should be that it's only criminal when the medical man, he exhibits a gross lack of competence or inaction. So just because there is merely an error of judgment or an accident, no criminal liability should be attached to it. And the second case, Jacob Matthews case, everyone knows about it, but still I'll tell. In this case, there was a terminally ill cancer patient who was admitted in the hospital, and the patient suddenly developed breathlessness. The sister was called, Dr. Matthews, he came, and the sister was called he called the sister for the oxygen cylinder. When the oxygen cylinder was brought, it was found to be empty. Till the second oxygen cylinder came, the patient had expired. Now again, a criminal case was filed against the doctor. But again, the Supreme Court has said that this is a very landmark judgment for us. And I will always ask all the doctors to keep a copy of this judgment with you. In this, the Supreme Court has said that a private complaint cannot be entertained. No private complaint should be entertained. Like if the patient goes to a police station, the doctor cannot be arrested. Then the investigating officer, whoever is investigating the case, he has to obtain an independent and competent medical opinion. Then only he can file a case. And third is, and the doctor cannot be arrested in a routine manner. So these 3 points are very important in the Jacob Matthews case. Now, third, again, the Martin F. D'Souza versus Mohammad Ishfaq. This judgment was given in 2009. In this, gross negligence was defined. Again, I'll tell you briefly. The patient, he had a severe urinary tract infection and he was admitted in the hospital. And he was given only 3 days amikacin and he was then discharged. But the patient, again, even after discharge, he was taking injection amikacin on his own, and the patient developed sensory neural deafness. And so he filed a case against against the hospital. So again, the Supreme Court has said that the doctor will be the gross negligence. It will be criminal negligence will be applied only in these cases, like the gross negligence. If you're operating on a wrong patient, if you're operating on a wrong limb, eye or ear, you're giving the wrong blood transfusion, you're giving wrong inhalational gases, giving a drug to which the patient has known allergy, or you're leaving a mop or instrument inside the body. Now coming to how to handle sudden death. This is a very scary situation and it can happen with anyone, either it's a physician or a surgeon. So you should know how to handle sudden death. Now, when a death occurs in a hospital, we have to deal with 3 issues. First is the medical issues. Like when the patient is the condition is deteriorating, we have to know how to handle him medically. Second is the social issues. Now, how do we break the news to the relatives? Because we never know how they are going to react. So we have to be ready for that also. And third is the legal issues. So I will be discussing the legal issues today. Now, in case of death or any untoward incident during treatment, it is advisable to first complete all your documents before declaring death. Documentation is very important. I will suggest that before you declare the death of the patient to the relatives, please complete all your documents inside the operation theater or inside your chamber, whatever there. Because afterwards, you never know how the patient will react. There are incidences, the relatives, they just barge into the OT or in your chamber and they take away all the documents. You must have seen so many videos also. So it's better to complete all your documents, because once they have taken away the documents, you can't do anything. So first of all, fill all your documents. Inform the police immediately, either in writing or on telephone. Now, if you feel that the police has to be informed immediately. If you feel that you cannot go to direct there, give them in writing, just give them a telephone call. Them, and whoever is receiving the complaint, just ask him his badge number and just note it down with whom you have registered your complaint. So you have to inform police immediately in the cause of sudden death. Now, if the death has occurred due to some drug reaction, keep all the vials separately and hand them to the police. Do not dispose them, as they will be needed by the police for evidence. The batch number of the medicine must be noted. So if the death has occurred, keep all the vials all the cylinders, everything should be kept just like that, because the police will come, they will do the panchnama, they will see all the injections. You have to hand them in packets, and you have to note down the batch number of the medicine, because there are incidences because death of the patient. So it is very beneficial for us to note the batch number. Now, if the death has occurred in the operation theatre, keep all the case papers ready with you, which I have already told you. Take care that these case papers are not manhandled. They will be needed by the police. Keep at least 3 copies of all the case papers with you. You have to give the original copies to the police, and you have to take an acknowledgement from them, whatever copies you are giving. For example, if you are giving the consent paper of the before you have taken before the surgery, or the prescription letter which you had given to the patient, whatever is there, you have to just note down all the name of the case papers, and you have to take an acknowledgement from the police that you have handed over all these original case copies to the police. And please keep, I will suggest at least keep 10 copies with you, because you never know where all you are going to leave those case papers. Now, if a death is reported, or if an FIR, sometimes what happens, that time the patient, they don't, the relatives, they don't make any complaint. They might make a complaint even after a few days or some months. So when a death is reported, the FIR is lodged immediately. Then the patient, the police authorities, they will come to your hospital. They will interrogate you, your staff, and all the other involved persons. That is, which is called as the panchnama. Now, these evidence, after this, the police officials, they collect the evidence. The investigating officer, he will send all the collected evidence, the documents, and all the related matter to an experts committee working. Usually, it is sent in a government hospital or whatever medical college or nearby college is there. They will send it to them. Now, this expert committee, the medical committee, is formed for studying that case, and they will apply this Boehm's test. I will tell you in detail later what is Boehm's test. They will apply this Boehm test, and they will prepare a report as to whether the doctor is negligent or not. Now, this police officials, they receive the report from the expert committee that the doctor is, if the doctor is said to be not negligent, then they will file a summary report to drop the case against the doctor. Now, the case will be dropped. But if the expert committee, it gives report of the doctor that the doctor is being negligent, then a charge sheet will be filed against the doctor. Now, if a charge sheet is filed, then the case, it will go on in the court. There will be the process of examination, the cross-examination, re-examination in the courtroom. The judge, he will make the record of all the statements, evidences, everything. And he will, and after listening to all the evidences, looking at all the statements, he will decide whether he is convicted or acquitted the doctor. Now, in these cases, the police should be immediately informed. If there is a sudden, unexpected, violent, and unexplained death, there is a suspected homicide, cases of suicidal deaths, unknown unconscious patient, death on operation table, suspected unnatural death, instant death after treatment or reaction to medicine. If a married lady is, she's dying within 7 years of marriage due to any reason, undiagnosed death within 24 hours of admission, any cases of poisoning and accidental death. Now, what is a Boehm's test? I'll just briefly tell you about this case. It's the case of from UK, and this judgment was given in 1957. Now, this patient, Mr. Boehm, he was a case of suicidal tendencies, and he was supposed to be given ECT therapy. Now, this is a case of 1957. At that time, sometimes the anesthesia, some psychiatrists used to give anesthesia, some used to not give anesthesia. So Mr. Boehm, who was not given anesthesia while giving ECT, and the patient suffered multiple fractures, and he filed a case in the hospital. Now, after looking at all the statements, evidences, the Supreme Court, the judge, Mr. McNair, he said that a doctor is not guilty of negligence if he has acted in accordance with a practice which is accepted by a responsible body of medical men. Like at that time, there were two opinions. The ECT was, nowadays the ECT is given only with anesthesia, but this case is of 1957. So that time, some used to give anesthesia, some used to not give. So the Supreme Court has said that both the opinions of the doctor, they are correct. So if a doctor reaches the standard of a responsible body of medical opinion, he is not negligent. So if there are a group of doctors who are giving ECT without anesthesia, then he is not negligent. But this case is of 1957. So now in Boehm's test, the judge has said that, and now this Boehm test, it is applied all over the world for deciding whether the doctor is negligent or not. Even in India also it is used. So it is not necessary for every professional to possess the highest level of expertise in that branch which he practices, neither a very low degree of care and competence. So if, as an ENT surgeon, you don't need to possess you should not possible you know every surgery or every type of every highest level of expertise, but similarly there should not be a very low degree of care and competence. And there are three criteria to be fulfilled. Now the medical expert committee, they will apply these three criteria to show whether the Boehm test is positive or not. First is that there is an usual and normal practice. Whatever treatment you are giving, it should be done by other ENT surgeons also. If it is done, that means the doctor is not negligent. The doctor has not adopted that practice. Whatever practice is there for, suppose now a patient of epistaxis is coming to you, severe epistaxis. There you whatever, it's not necessary that every time you might find the artery, you may be able to cauterize it. But basic, at least if you are not able to find out, you have to either do anterior packing or you have to do a posterior nasal packing. So in such cases, if the doctor has not done anything, then that means the doctor has not adopted that practice. And the course which the doctor has adopted, no other ENT surgeon would have adopted that. So if the case it goes to court and if any other ENT surgeon is asked, what will you do a patient of epistaxis? If he will say that either I will cauterize the artery if I'm able to find it. If not, at least I will do a anterior nasal packing or a posterior nasal packing, and I might refer the patient. So if these three things are not being done by the doctor, then it shows that the Boehm's test is positive, and that means the doctor is negligent. Now, the following principles have to be followed while deciding whether the medical professional is guilty or not. Now, these medical expert committee, they have to follow these following principles. The negligent it must be very culpable or gross, as I've already told you, and it should not be just an error of judgment. Similarly, neither a very high degree nor a very low degree of care and competence is required by law. And there is a scope for, definitely there are scopes for genuine differences of opinion, but they should be followed by at least some ENT surgeons. A medical practitioner would be liable only when his conduct fell below that of the standards of a reasonably competent practitioner in his field. Now, if the patient, he has just left the patient of the epistaxis and just discharged him and asked him to go without doing anything, then definitely he has fallen below the standards. Negligence cannot be attributed to a doctor so long as he performs his duties with reasonable skill and competence. So whatever, even if he is not able to do a spinopalatine artery ligation, it is not necessary. At least he has done something for the patient. So he has performed his duties with reasonable, whatever skill and competence he has done. He has tried to save the patient. Now, these are the types of negligence. First is the res ipsa loquitur. There is also, that is an Italian term, and it means that the thing speaks for itself. The meaning of this is that the negligence is so gross that it can be seen by everyone. Like suppose if you are left a scissor inside the abdomen, I mean, there is no defense available for the doctor. How will he defend himself in such cases? So it is also called as a gross negligence. That means a res ipsa loquitur, which I've seen showed in this picture, that the patient had come for a tonsillectomy and a hysterectomy was done on her. Second is also a type that is a contributory negligence. Now, sometimes what happens, we have patients, we advise them, for example, after the ear surgery, we advise the patient not to dive inside the water or not take an air travel, but still the patient doesn't listen to you and he might face some complication. In such cases, when you have given the advice to the patient in writing and the patient has not followed your advice, then the patient has also contributed for the negligence. Third is the professional misconduct. Now, in your profession, if there is any kind of misconduct, for example, you are committing an adultery with your patient, if you are not following the proper guidelines, if you are giving unnecessary steroids or antipsychotic drugs to the patient, if you are doing false advertisement, all these come under professional misconduct. They are also a form of negligence. Now, what to do now after all these? Still, if you receive a notice from the patient, now what to do? First of all, don't panic at all, because nowadays you have seen the litigations have gone very high. for any silly reasons, the patient, they go to court. Even though if they don't go to the criminal court, they will go to the consumer court or the civil court. So in such cases, do not panic at all. First of all, do is all the documents regarding the case, right from the patient's prescription paper to his consent, to his admission form, to his findings during when he was admitted, to his OT notes, if the discharge card was given to him or his discharge card, everything, collect all the documents. Then get together all the notes of that patient written by the staff nurses, resident doctors, and consultants on file. Now, see, these cases, they will go on for years. This, you might receive a summons of that case even after 2 years, and that time you are not going to remember. Sometimes we have RMOs working in a hospital, the staff nurses. So whatever notes are there, whenever at that time only, those they should be filled by the staff nurses or your resident doctors, because after 2 years, the staff nurses or the resident doctors, they might have shifted to another cities. It won't be possible for you to call them for in the court. So in such cases, that time only, before the patient is discharged, complete all your notes in detail, and all the notes, they should match. Sometimes what happens, the staff nurse will write something else, the resident will write something else, the anesthetist will write something else. So just see that all your notes, they are matching with each other. Now collect even your email consultations. Sometimes in some cases, we take consultations from a senior doctor or from another faculty doctor, for some physician or some neurologist. We take email, we might send an email or they might reply. So in such cases, they are valid in court. So collect even your email consultations. Immediately inform your insurance company. Now, when we take an indemnity insurance, we never read the terms and conditions because there are so many, we never bother to read them. But if you have not informed your insurance company, they will get a chance, they will not pay the indemnity insurance. So immediately, first thing is that you should inform your insurance company. And third is, look out for a lawyer who has experience in dealing with medical legal cases. Nowadays, there are a lot of medical legal experts also like me. For example, I have a law degree, but I can't practice as a lawyer because we can't take counsel registration of two counsels. So I can just guide any lawyer. I do the legal drafting for him. So the last point is, reply to the notice with the help of your lawyer. The first notice, which whatever we receive, you have to give a reply. That is a written statement, and this is the foundation of your defense. So that reply has to be very proper. So always consult a medical legal consultant before, because see, some lawyers, they won't be having very much experience of medical field. So with the help of a medical legal consultant, you just prepare that reply. Once you receive the notice from the consumer court, you have to reply within 30 days. If you don't reply within this period, then the court, it will give decision ex parte. Like they will say that the doctor has failed to reply, and so they will give the decision in the favor of the patient. So always send a reply within 30 days. Now, along with the written statement, whatever you are giving that reply, attach all the case papers regarding that case along with references. If you have any references from books, journals, and internet with exact internet address, please attach to it. Now, what should the reply contain? Now, these points are not important for a ENT surgeon, but I have just posted it so that you are careful while you are practicing. In your day-to-day practice, you should know what all things to follow, so that if at all a case is registered against you, you should know what all documents you have to give. So first is, was the surgery indicated? Whatever surgery you have done, what was the exact diagnosis, these investigations, and was the surgery really indicated in that patient? And was it done at the proper time? In case if the patient has come in an emergency, at what time he has come, at what time you have taken him in the operation theater, everything has to be noted, and it has to be mentioned in the reply. Was it done by a competent surgeon and competent anesthetist? Both the surgeon and the anesthetist, are they competent enough? Do they have enough experience of handling such kind of cases? Then what was the type of anesthesia used? Was it appropriate for the surgery? Whatever anesthesia, for example, if the case has to be done under GA and you are doing it under local anesthesia, then definitely you are being negligent. So whatever anesthesia was used, was it appropriate for that surgery? Was the setup appropriate for the surgery? Now, if in a small place, if you're doing a high risk surgery case, definitely the court will say that did you have, because you know what are the forcing, you should be able to know what are the complications, and if are you capable enough to handle those complications if at all they arise. So if you're not able to handle those complications in that particular setup, please don't go for that surgery. Where all the precautions taken to prevent complications. If, for example, if you know that you're operating a case of tonsil or if the patient might bleed, do you have a post-op? Do you have a proper follow-up that if the patient comes again to your hospital, if the patient comes to your hospital, will you be able to, I don't know why I'm doing this, will you be able to handle those complications? Was the problem which led to a mischief detected at an appropriate time? Whatever complication has occurred, was it detected at an appropriate time? And whatever steps you have taken to prevent or to control those complications, were they done? Then was the patient referred to another specialty in time when it was needed, or was another surgeon called on time when the mischief has been occurred? Was blood available at the time of need? If you feel that the patient is going to bleed, please make sure that the blood is available. Was the situation conveyed to the other relatives in time from time to the relatives? The situation has to be conveyed. Now, if the patient is coming in an emergency, you have to take a high risk consent. While handling the patient, if the patient is in the hospital, you have to convey the relatives. At least I will advise at least in a day, at least take consent for 2 times at least for a high risk patient. Then these are the other things which have to be mentioned in the reply letter. The qualifications, the training and the experience of surgeon, these matter a lot. The infrastructure of the clinic, hospital, OT and special facilities like the ICU, whether they are available. And so that's why we handle such type of high risk cases. The facts regarding the previous illness or treatment which might have been omitted in the complaint. Sometimes the patient, they don't tell about the previous illness or it has not been mentioned. You have to mention that the patient was suffering from so and so illness. Then the written evidence of the consent by the patient and his relatives. High risk consent, as I've told you. The situation of the case, example, emergency situation when some facilities might not be available. For example, if now I practice in a very small place, in such cases, if an emergency patient comes to my place, definitely the court will not expect that I have to take care. In an emergency, I have to see that I am making the patient stable and then I am referring the patient. Evidence that reasonable knowledge, skill and care has been exercised by the doctor. If there is any kind of negligence on part of the patient, please mention it in the reply letter. These are the defenses which are available to us. They should be properly registered with the medical council. Informed consent, I've spoken in the last lecture. I'll just I'll tell in brief. Please take an informed consent, separate consent for anesthesia, for surgery. If you're admitting a patient in the ICU or if for any high risk cases, please take a proper informed consent. Even for blood transfusion, separate consent has to be taken. Your documentation only speaks in the court. If the documentation is good, you have a good defense in the court of law. So documentation should be very proper. Foreseeability. Now, in some cases, we see that some complications are about to rise. In such cases, we should know what all complications can occur, and we have to tackle those complications. Contributory negligence, as I've already told you, if the patient has contributed to the negligence, then the negligence is being divided. Again, the error of judgment in this is a very nice case. Recently, 2 years back, the Supreme Court has given a decision. Dr. Jayashree Ingole versus Government of Maharashtra. In this, the patient had come with pain in abdomen, and the surgeon was called for to see the patient in the hospital. The surgeon came. She saw the patient had some bleeding disorders, and so she called for the physician. But the only thing was that she did not wait for the physician to come and she left the hospital. By the time the physician came, the patient had expired. So in such cases, the Supreme Court has said that Dr. Ujjwal, the Dr. Jayashree Ningoli, who was the surgeon who had seen the patient, that she is not. It was just an error of judgment. She never thought that the patient would expire, and so she had left the hospital, and it is not a gross negligence. So these are some of the defenses which are available to a doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one question here in the chat. So, can we deny treatment of to any patient, example, suspected COVID-19 if treatment is not available in your hospital?
I'll just stop sharing the slide. Just 1 second. Okay. Just can you repeat the question?
Can we deny treatment to a suspected COVID-19 patient if you don't have the facilities available in your hospital or clinic?
Yeah, we can. Because now see, there are COVID-19, there are special hospitals for COVID-19, and if you know that the patient is COVID-19, then definitely we can delay. Only in case of emergency, I really don't know, because now if the patient has come to, if it's in a real, for example, is an accident patient or something, I don't think you can deny. But if he's coming for some elective, this thing, definitely you can deny. Not in any case of emergency.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Am I audible, madam?
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Durga Prasad from Hyderabad Government ENT Hospital, madam.
Hello.
Yeah, hello. Once a judge remarked, he came to visit a patient in our hospital. We were taking informed consent. Then he said, the only paper which I would allow onto my bench without notarizing is a promissory note.
Is a promissory?
Is a promissory note, that is all. This has to be made into an affidavit and notarize it, then only I will allow it onto the bench. Now, a subject to interpretation of law is to this extent, how safe are our documentation?
No, sir, we don't have to affidavit the documents. I mean, I didn't get your question.
He says that's what I understand from the law.
No. See, a document, whatever, if the doctor has signed the document, it's a legal document. Whatever you are signing the document, even if it's your prescription paper, many of us, we write on the prescription paper that it should not be used for legal purposes, but it is not the case. Anything which you are signing or and handing it over to the patient, it's a legal document and it can be used against you in the court of law.
Okay, because that is the subject to interpretation we are worried about. Like the decision changes from district court to high court, from high court to Supreme Court when you go. Many times the decision changes in the same case. Now, is it not subject to interpretation?
So I didn't get your question.
Rupali, may I join in with question?
Of course. If you can, please answer.
Hi, Rupali. Wonderful as always, Rupali. As always good to keep hearing you talk, and it feels nice. Dr. Prasad, Durga Prasad, if I may answer your question for you, I'm getting where you're coming from. Do you hear me, sir?
He has muted himself. Hello?
Sriharsha?
Just can you unmute him, Dr. Sriharsha, just can you unmute?
I'm quite audible. Please go ahead.
Okay, no, I wanted to answer the main person, sir, Dr. Prasad, who's asked the question. So Sriharsha being the host, I need to take his permission. Sriharsha, can I go ahead and say it? But he's not there. So if he's not addressed properly, then he may not be satisfied with this query. Okay, anyway, I will presume that he's listening in. Dr. Durga Prasad, the situation is that you have to understand what the judge said is basically something we all have to live by, because how much ever you take a paper consent in writing, that's not foolproof anyway. Rupali will tell you more about that. The fact is that does not mean that you will not take a written consent, and the best way to The best way to take a written consent is not just you and the patient, but two people from your hospital and two witnesses from the patient side. That's what gives the credibility to that paper. There
Yes,
is
sir.
no paper which is absolutely creditable, and anybody can rubbish it away by saying a lot of things. And Rupali,
Yeah.
I think Rupali, I will let her talk to you about this fact in this statement, that there is nothing that is 100% foolproof in a court of law, and a written
Yes, sir.
consent does not mean that you are safe.
Yeah.
But having
Yeah.
said that, it does not mean that you should not take it, because see, the court of law tries to see one thing, Dr. Prasad.
Yes, sir.
Court tries to see what and how, what is your intention and how meticulous you are in doing your job.
Okay.
That's what they try to see. So if you don't have a consent which is signed by you and the patient and two witnesses on both sides, it does not
Yeah.
show your meticulous nature. It goes against you. But if you
Okay.
have a consent like that, it shows that this particular doctor is very meticulous and he does
Okay.
everything by the book and he has a good intent. So when you have
Right.
good intent, it saves you.
Okay.
Because this is an imply. I think Rupali, go ahead and
Yes.
explain to him about the.
For informed consent, I've seen that everyone has to follow all the rules. Like you said, that two people have to sign the consent form. There must be two witnesses, the surgeon as well as the anesthetist, as well as the patient. All the three of them have to sign the consent form. Consent has to be taken in the patient's own language. So all these things they have to follow by each and every doctor.
The problem is when a patient comes with a stridor, do we have time to do all this?
No, sir. Sir, the court has said that in case of emergency, there is no need to take a consent. These are an exception for the consent. In case of an
Okay.
emergency, you don't need to take a consent.
Okay. Thank you, madam.
Having said
Kind of
that,
you, sir.
after the emergency is over, you should please document it that it was done in an emergency. Or while you're
Okay.
handling it, somebody from your staff should be making a note of that, that the patient has come in at such and such time with such and such
Along with
situation
signings.
without
Yes.
any attendant, and as a result, we have taken up the patient on an emergency basis, because even the anesthetist can do it while you are performing your procedure. The anesthetist
Yes.
can put that down.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Kind of you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. There's one question for Dr. Rohiwal. Yes.
रोहिवाल सर इकडे बोला पहिले नंतर घरी बोला.
Hello, ha, bola.
Sir, I saw the status of the printed consent form. Are they legal? Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
there have been lot of controversy regarding the printed consent forms, which are used by most of the hospitals. You have to just fill in the name, address, and etc. Some court decision was there, and they had said that these printed consent forms are not valid. What is the status now?
See, sir, what happens in many hospitals, like in, suppose if it's only an ENT surgeon, the case is different. But if you see in multi-speciality hospital, then what happens? They take a same consent form for every patient, every surgery, whether it's an ENT surgery or a gynec surgery or a spine surgery. So the court has said that there should be a separate consent form, a separate printed consent form for each and every surgery. So if you're doing a tonsillectomy, the risks will be different, the alternative treatment will be different. So the consent form should be separate for each and every surgery. That's what the court has said. This thing has been discussed in many groups. I have discussed this with many medical legal experts also. So there is no need to take. You don't have to write every time the consent form in your own handwriting. Like like me and Seema, we have already said that there should be a separate consent form for every surgery, and we have also requested our association that there should be a separate consent form for each and every surgery. So that is the point.
Sir, and that consent form should be even for your OPD procedures. I think this is the discussion that Rupali and me have in most of the webinars, that even the smallest of procedure, you need to have something written down.
Even doing syringing, nasal cautery, we have to take a separate consent. Even though we think it is a minor ENT procedure, we have to take a consent.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you. wonderful presentation, Rupali madam, as usual.
Absolutely, sir. She's getting bigger and bigger by the day.
Yeah, she has become Nani Palkhiwala of medico legal problems of
Ram
ENT.
Jethmalani, sir, where Palkhiwala and all.
No, Palkhiwala does analysis. Ram Jethmalani is one who is fighting in the things. She is,
No, but
beyond that.
jokes
Analytic.
no, but jokes apart, seriously, Rupali, very, very good presentation. Very good.
It's a wonderful presentation. Congratulations.
Yes.
Dr. Imam, can you hear me?
Yes,
sir.
yes, sir. Sorry, yes, Munkas.
Yeah, so who is Ram Jethmalani? Who is what? I mean, for us, two of you are the
Sir, let's
luminaries.
discuss these questions, please. So that's one question. Does it? Hello?
Please go. You wanted to say something?
No. You want to ask something, sir? Ask any question?
I'm coming to that. Basically, there was the press we read just a few days back, no FIR against doctor and advocates. So how you explain it? Have you come across that article?
I have come across. I don't know about the advocates really, but against the doctors, as I've already told you, that in the Jacob Matthews case, if he goes and complains in the police station, they just take a complaint, then they investigate a complaint. They don't charge a file sheet until and unless they get the opinion of the medical body. Once you get the opinion of the expert medical body, and that also can be challenged by the patients. Even if the expert medical body has given in favor of the patient, in the favor of the doctor, the patient can again challenge that decision also. So till then, charge sheet cannot be filed against a doctor.
So that you take as some relief to the doctors for the false one and all that?
Yes. They just can't arrest the doctor.
So I think can somebody in the
304 is applied, which is a bailable offence. Section 304 is applied.
4A.
304A.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
And I mean, if I may add something, Rupali, I will just,
Sure, of course.
tell most of the viewers and listeners that is the most critical time for you to be there when that happens, because sometimes by mistake or by any intentional issue, if an FIR is filed as 304, to convert that and get it to 304A is going to be hell for you. So
Yes.
at the ground level itself, you should always try and tackle it at that level and make sure that if at all an FIR is being lodged, it should be 304A. Because we know the rules, but sometimes the people filing the FIR and the people accepting the FIR, even though they know the rules, may want to put it in a different manner.
They are sometimes even under the pressure of.
Exactly. So if that happens, you will be in deep trouble trying to get it from 304 to 304A. So first thing is to try and tackle it at that level itself. This is ground reality. Sriharsha?
Sorry, but issues.
Okay.
There was one question. I hope it was answered. Does a decision made by civil court in favor of the doctor in a medical legal case holds any ground in consumer court?
Even if the decision has been given in the civil court, the patient can still go in the consumer court. So, definitely it holds any ground. He can go in the consumer court.
So what Rupali is saying to you is that, both courts are totally different. But in a way, consumer court should not worry you so much. Civil court is much more botheration. Because in a consumer court, your penalty is purely financial. Even in a civil court, right, Rupali?
It's only financial compensation.
Yeah, it's mostly.
Nowadays, the patient, they usually go to consumer court. Because the decisions there are given very fast. Consumer courts, the decisions they usually come within 2 years.
The problem is that in civil courts, your expenses are higher in hiring lawyers and all as
And
compared.
the cases, they will go on and on.
Yeah.
No other questions?
Yeah, I would like to open up the chat to the participants. Anyone would like to interact can unmute themselves and directly speak.
Sorry, I spoke without your permission, Sriharsha.
Sir,
Really see your you always, you present the practical aspects. Because working in Pune, I think you have more handled all the practical aspects.
Madam,
Yes.
madam, in the WhatsApp media, it has come nowadays. Doctors' issues are exempted from consumer court.
No, sir. They are not exempted from.
No.
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 Okay, madam. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, sir. Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
This is Dr. Pratik from Jaipur. So I just asked a question. I had a query.
Yes.
When a doctor won a case in the court of law, say in a civil court, and he just want to take that copy of judgment to consumer court to get the decision in his favor, does it hold any ground?
Yes, the court might see because there even in civil court also they take the opinion of the medical expert committee. So the consumer courts might refer to that the decision given by the medical court committee until and unless it has been challenged by the patient again.
Until and unless what?
It has been challenged. See, sometimes this the medical whatever medical expert committee opinion, it can be challenged either by the both, either by the patient and even by the doctor. It can be challenged.
Exactly.
Can I just say something?
Yes, sir.
Pratik, so
Yes, sir.
for all of you who do not probably understand the working of our law, one thing you have to understand is when somebody is appointed as a judge. So once they are appointed as a judge, it is their final decision. Now that judge may be 28-year-old or 29-year-old and you will be 60 or 50 years old, but then that judge giving out the judgment is final. So a lot depends on their intellect, on their moods also at times, on their reading, on their knowledge, on their acceptance. So it's a very subjective thing. The only thing that goes in your favor is that if you are not happy with the judgment, you have the right to appeal.
Okay.
But it's very difficult. So those of us like Rupali will tell you, I can tell you, when you have been in courts of law, when you are, seeing cases being fought for your colleagues or for whatever, there's a lot of subjectivity in the decision making.
Yes.
The objectivity is only from the lawyer side because you have to present the arguments very objectively. But the decision always remains pretty subjective and it's a one man or one lady decision depending on who your judge is.
Now there are recent amendments in the Consumer Protection Act. Like suppose if you have lost the case in the district tribunal, then like the compensation you have to give is suppose it is like 50 lakhs. So and if you want to appeal in the national tribunal, so you have to pay that compensation and then only you can go to the national.
Yes. National.
Fortunately, law is not like how we have protocols, to say that, acute otitis media has to be treated in this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's a protocol. Law does not have any standard protocol like that to say, this is how you've got to arrive at a judgment.
Exactly. Right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Sir, there are two questions, ma'am. So what is the minimum amount for professional indemnity insurance required?
That will depend on which place you practice, what kind of cases you handle. There are some ENT surgeons I know who have taken insurance in crores, some have taken in lakhs. So it's up to you. You decide like what kind of cases. If you're doing major high risk cases, then definitely it should go in at least 1 crore. What do you say, Seema? You have more experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for somebody, I do know Dr. Sukhvinder Bindra who has asked this question. For somebody at that level, definitely a very high level of indemnity insurance. See, in any city for that matter, Dr. Bindra, in any city, and depending on the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of clientele you're dealing with, I think, Rupali, it's about 1 crore for the state and Supreme Court is beyond 1 crore, no? Something like that? For them to appeal?
But consumer.
Yeah, consumer court.
No. See, it is. It will depend on the patient how much he wants to take compensation. So, up to from 20 lakhs to 1 crore, it is for the district, and above 1 crore, it is.
So that's what I meant. So what I wanted to say was, see, when it is 20 lakhs to 1 crore, the fellow will fight you only in a district court, right? So at least you should have a minimum of 1 crore. Suppose somebody files for you beyond 1 crore, that means he's already a big guy who has the capacity to go to the High Court and to go to the Supreme Court. So you have to be ready for a bigger battle because he's not that, walk by OPD kind of patient who will just put a case and then see, because he also has to go to High Court. He also has to go to Supreme Court. Then, if I may say so, you're in for real deep shit. Sorry to use the words, but if he's going to sue you for more than 1 crore, be prepared for a bigger, tougher battle. So always keep it a little higher for your own safety. It's a simple thing, simple logic. I mean, if he's got the courage to take you to a High Court and Supreme Court, he's a big gun. He's not a daily worker or some kind of person who's just there you don't have to worry about. Right, Rupali?
Madam,
Thank you, Dr. Rupali. Thank you, Dr. Seema.
Madam, I understand that. Madam.
Yes, sir. Yes. Hello. Yes,
Madam,
sir.
I heard that the amount of compensation depends upon the earning capacity of the patient. If we are treating Tata Birla, it may be compensation may be in crore. If I am treating a beggar, the compensation may be in thousands.
See,
something like that, for example.
The patient can demand for 50 crores also. The Supreme Court will decide the compensation. There are a lot of factors. Even the age of the patient will also count. Him, how many, how much he was earning when that incident occurred. How many more years he's going to work. So there are a lot of factors involved. And of course, as Seema has said, that the mood of the judge.
All those around the earning capacity of the patient, that is his limit. All these points which you told, they run around the earning capacity of the patient, age, and all those things.
Capacity of the patient and how many more years he is going to earn.
Yeah,
that is also, like, what is his age? If he's going to get retired after 2 years, then definitely so much he won't be awarded so much compensation. But if his age is just 30 years, then definitely the compensation will be more.
Ma'am, the next question is, in every state, if we practice across multiple states in medical council?
Yes, I think we have to register. Yes, we can't practice, or at least because
I think by default we go into the Indian Medical Council register from the state council by default, or don't we?
No, we have to register even in the state council, like we have registered in the Maharashtra Medical Council. We have to register in the state council. And in this pandemic, I am getting so many queries. The registration has stopped. I heard they're not registering, so the doctors are not able to. The newly pass out are not able to practice also.
I think we have come to.
Hello, sir. I'm Dr. Puranik from Mangalore.
Yes.
This is for Seema, sir.
Sir, please direct it to Rupali. Rupali
304 and 304A.
Sorry, sir.
Yeah, asking Seema, sir. This you are telling about case registering. Hello.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
This 304 and 304A. Can you just explain that?
I think Rupali will be the best one. One is homicide culpable, not amount. Rupali, go ahead. Culpable homicide not amounting to murder.
Murder. Sir, 304A is that there was a conduct and there was either an intention or a knowledge that the patient would there would be damages to the patient. And in 304A, there was only conduct. There was neither an intention nor a knowledge. It's like this.
And they are vastly, vastly different in terms of their entire process. 304 is very dangerous. 304A, at least to certain level, you are out on bail. It's bailable.
Okay, thank you, madam. Thank you, sir.
Silvan, question. I'm asking question.
Is someone trying?
Okay.
I think we can wind up for the
There was
same.
also something recently, Rupali, about there being that a patient from any other state can file in his state against you, even if in Pune, no?
Yeah, initially first it was like he had to file where the doctor decided. Now the patient can, if the patient is from Karnataka, he can file it in Karnataka against a doctor who is sitting in Mumbai.
So I think all the more time to stop practicing nationally and getting patients from out of town. Stick to the patients within town only. Good, good. Thank you.
Somebody's trying to speak.
Dr. was trying to ask, I think. Dr.
Yes.
Ishwara Reddy was trying to ask.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
If you are running a ENT OP only, what are minimum records which you are supposed to maintain?
Only OPD.
Only OPD, madam.
Oh, so you're not going to do any procedure, minor, major, nothing?
Minor means only syringing.
Okay, okay. So only then only a prescription. You have, according to the code, you have to have a Xerox copy of every prescription, sir.
Okay. You have to make a copy and then keep it.
Yes, yes, yes. And even for minor procedures, I will suggest you take a consent, because see, even a syringing can damage the tympanic membrane or even a foreign body. So just take a consent form, sign a consent form from the patient. Apart from that, you don't need anything.
Every prescription you are supposed to maintain a copy.
Yes, sir. You have to maintain a copy of a prescription.
For any procedure, whether it is minor, you
Yeah,
have to take a copy.
yes. Yes, even for if it's an OPD procedure, you can put the notes even on the prescription letter also, but keep a copy of it.
Okay. Is there any prescribed consent in the OP for different from the operation theatre? The consent form, will it differ in a
No,
OP?
sir.
Same thing.
See, there are 6 points which have to be mentioned in the consent form. First is the purpose of the surgery, why you are doing the procedure. Example, the diagnosis, then the nature, what are you going to do, then what are the risks involved, what is the alternative treatment, and how will be the prognosis. And 6th point is what will happen if the patient does not give consent for surgery. Like if the patient refuses to do that procedure, what all complications can occur. So these are the 6 points which have to be mentioned in every consent form according to the Supreme Court guidelines.
Is the consent forms available in the Google or in our association website?
No, I don't think till date, I don't think AOI has any consent.
AOI is in the process, sir. They are doing it. They're doing it this year. Hopefully, they will be coming out with a complete list. In fact, Rupali is part of that committee, subcommittee of AOI that is coming out with the consent forms.
Yes, because everybody may prepare their own consent form. It may not be acceptable in.
So that's what, because see, when the case goes to the court
journal, they can print this is the consent form which has to be maintained. Then for each procedure, then everybody can easily take a copy and then print out and follow the procedure.
Yes.
So that we'll be safe in the court.
Yeah, I think OIC Association has this. You all
Yeah,
have.
OSA we have our separate ones, but
Private trusts also have. They
yeah.
also have.
No, AOI.
AOI, like I said, sir, is doing it. Dr. Bhargav has put it on to Rupali's head only. She's heading the committee for that and she's doing it. So you will have to push Rupali and Dr. Bhargav to get these forms out.
Forms out. So that everybody, it will be available in the journal, means everybody will have the access.
Yeah.
Make a copy and then follow in the OPDs, so that any problem comes, we will be a little bit safe.
Yes.
Take Rupali's mobile number and keep messaging her every second day, sir. Then she'll get these forms ready.
See, I am ready since 2016. My work is ready. It's up to the association now.
At least you have any form so that you can send by WhatsApp.
Definitely, sir.
Consent form in the OPD for a syringing.
I'll just send you a sample consent form. I'll just put my number here on the chat.
Okay, madam. Yes, I have noted down. We will give a message. You can send us.
Yes, sir. I'll send you a copy.
Sir, meanwhile, there's one question, ma'am. Actually, Dr. Maheshwara Reddy was trying to ask about a situation where you don't maintain case sheets, but if you write the case details in papers, does it affect you medico-legally?
And case sheets and case papers means?
What he's asking is that instead of keeping your own OPD paper, on the prescription paper only on one side you write all the details and the other side you write the prescription. Meaning on the one half the...
Or IPD patient, OPD or IPD patient?
OPD.
OPD you can write. OPD basis you can write.
Okay, actually, there's no clarity in if we were asking IP or OP, but maybe.
No, but IPD you have to maintain a separate case sheets.
No, but OPD paper, if you write everything on the OPD paper is also good enough, right?
Yeah. On the OPD paper, it's good enough. You can write that whatever the foreign body has been removed, syringing has been done.
In fact, it's a very good habit to keep writing on your OPD paper what you have found, what are the examination findings, what is the probable diagnosis. It does increase our work, no doubt, but it is a lot of safety involved in that.
Yes.
Hello, madam.
Yes, sir.
How many days we have to maintain the OPD name register? How many years we have to keep it?
Sir, for OPD and IPD, it is 3 years. And for pediatric patients, it is 21 years. And for a medico-legal case, till the case is fully resolved.
Okay. In the OPD, what are the details we have to maintain? Because name, from which place he comes, or the number, like this. Is there any pro forma?
Yes. The name, age, address of the patient, if any registration number is there. For pediatric patient, I will advise even the weight of the patient.
Okay.
And
all the details we are supposed to maintain.
Even sir, during when you write a prescription pad, like we used to do during a PG, it is right from the patient's complaint, the findings, the provisional diagnosis, the investigations advised. I will advise you to write everything.
Is it for the OPD procedure? For the OP also? Yes,
please do it, because see what happens, you never know when the patient might land in the court. Sometimes what happens, the patient has come to you for first consultation. If he is not happy or he is not relieved, he might go to the second, he might land in some complication, or he might, his disease might progress, he might go to the second doctor, and there he might not be happy with the second doctors and he will file a case. Now the second doctor, he will pull you also in the court. In such cases, your document, they will definitely help you if you have written everything in detail. So that's why I've always advised everyone to please write even the complaints, the findings, the investigations, advise everything.
Regarding the tablets, we don't know to which tablet which patient have the problem, because if he doesn't say, or if he says you don't have any allergy,
so in such cases,
it will become a problem.
Yeah, in such cases, I will advise the write no history of any drug allergy.
No history of drug allergy, but if he develops,
sir, if he develops, it's not, you can't tell what is going. But if he says that previously he has any drug allergy, you have to mention it in your.
Okay, madam, that will mention, and then we will avoid that. Protein is supposed to approximate accidental, I write. if he develops a problem, are we subject to any punishment for those things? Can he go to court?
See, I told you, sir, for any silly reason, the patient can go to court. In such cases, only a documents help you because, as I said, it's an error of judgment. You never know what patient is going to develop an allergy. If he has previously developed an allergy, you have to, it will be better if you have mentioned it in your prescription letter that the patient has so and so has given the history of allergy. Even in female patients, I will advise to write the date of the last menstrual period.
Date of?
Last menstrual period.
Okay, ma'am. For END also.
Yeah, it's better to write.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Dr. Akanksha Jain was asking, do we have to write brand names and shall we mention all the composition?
Yes, you have to write. And it should be in capital letters.
Yeah, ma'am. I think we can wind up the session for today. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. It was a great extensive discussion. Thank you, Seema sir, for giving us your valuable inputs.
I always come when Rupali is talking because I need to listen to her. There's always lots of things to pick up.
I'm relieved when I see you. I know there is someone to explain now.
No, it's not like that. It's really well done. Sorry if I just barged in a little late.
Sorry, that's welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Sriharsha. Thank you, Rupali.
Thank you.
We'll conclude the meeting, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Stay safe, all of y'all, please. Not only from COVID, but even from medical legal issues.
Good night, sir.
Good night. Good night.